Taoiseach, the climate situation was an emergency that needed to be addressed before COVID-19, but the urgency to address the climate emergency is now multiplied very significantly by the advent of COVID-19, because in fact there is a very important natural intersection between the destruction of biodiversity and the proliferation, the more frequent proliferation of pandemics. One of the questions that serious scientists are asking, and to some extent are suggesting and have evidence to believe, about the frequency of pandemics in recent years, that it is linked to the destruction of biodiversity. H1N1, swine flu, bird flu, the coronavirus, SARS, MERS, Ebola, just to name some of the more well-known ones. Why is this happening? One very significant reason is because of the destruction of biodiversity, because biodiversity acts as a natural firebreak on the spread of virus and disease. The destruction of biodiversity, in particular the destruction of natural habitats and forests, creates the conditions where pandemics of this sort and zoonotic, the jumping of viruses from animals to humans, becomes more likely. Now, that's important because we need to really grasp that very important fact. Now, where are our most natural biodiverse areas in this country? They're the ancient woodlands, which have been almost completely destroyed. Do you know how much ancient woodland is left in Ireland now, Taoiseach? 0.00.2%. And it's under pressure. And it's under pressure from the lack of biodiversity then impacting and having its own version of viruses, in the sense of invasive species threatening it, in Killarney Natural Park, for example. Right? Yeah, okay. My point is this. We need to protect the ancient woodlands. We need to nurture them, we need to let them expand, and we need real focus and investment in this area, rather than monocultural forestry and forms of agriculture that are destroying our biodiversity in a way that is threatening, ultimately, not just the natural world, but actually the ability of the planet to sustain our existence.
I take Deputy Boyd Barrett's point very seriously, but I don't have the scientific, proof. I'm aware of the thesis that's out there in terms of the linkage between the weakening biodiversity and the growth of pandemics. But there can be different factors as well. I mean, I think the growth of the world population itself has to be a factor, and which in certain areas is certainly facilitating ease of spread. So it's interesting, SARS, all in a decade. More than a decade. We've had SARS, we've had MERS, we've had, as H1, we've also had the swine flu and so on. COVID is the one that got away insofar as it wasn't tested and contact traced out of existence. And I would have spoken to a number of scientists who would equally be of a view that we may see more and more of these more frequently now than we would have for the last 100 years. I support fully every effort made to retain and strengthen our biodiversity. And particularly, you mentioned ancient woodlands. I think we have to do everything we possibly can to protect, but also to incentivize the nurturing of our biodiversity, which can recover if it's given the space to recover, both marine and on land. And that is why I favour the REP scheme in the Just Transition Fund, and why I also favour initiatives to create more native woodland on farms. And I think we should try and persuade farmers to do this. You have to have a contrast to the monoculture sort of forestry policy. I think we need to really grow more and more indigenous native Irish trees on a grander scale than we've been doing up to date. And I think that's extremely important, and that's something I will work with the responsible ministers in that regard. And in terms of the retrofit agenda, obviously there will have to be a degree of skilling, upskilling, and I think we have to work with the Institutes of Technology and the ETBs to make sure we can develop programs to bring a greater cohort of people who will be skilled in the retrofitting area, because I think there will be significant opportunities in that field into the future, because I think we do aim as a government to substantially increase the number of retrofits and the retrofitting activity generally. And in relation to Deputy MacDonald's final question, the allowance is an opposition allowance, and it ceases when you're no longer are a member or an opposition leader, and therefore it has ceased on becoming Taoiseach. That's the basic approach to that.